Welcome back to our coaching corner. This is 5 easy tips for you guys to ease back into the gym. And so I held off from recording anything like this because I personally wanted to be able to, 1, introduce myself back into the gym after this long quarantine, and 2, have pretty good anecdotal feedback to give to you guys as I've been easing many of my clients back into the gym as well. So this goes for also any long-term injury that you may have where you have to seek time outside the gym. So for me personally, other than this quarantine phase, I've never taken any longer length of time outside the gym other than for my breast augmentation, where I believe I took 6 to 8 weeks outside the gym, and I began at the 4-week mark back to training and doing some sort of form of movement via cardio, meaning like walking and whatnot. And back then, my training volume and my training expertise was far minimal. That was back, I would say, at this point, about 6 to 7 years ago. The first thing we have to think about before we go into our main 5 items is you have to think of stimulus and recovery. And you have to find that great balance between the two, because 1, stimulus is going to rebuild the tissue that you may have lost during the long time away from the gym. And recovery is where those adaptations are going to occur and the tissue is actually going to repair itself and actually rebuild itself in terms of strength and appearance. So while we don't always want to hear slow and steady is the way we win this race, it 100% is going to be. And you 100% have to give yourself grace and honor the time that you have been away from the gym, and think about the halftime rule. So for example, if you've been away from the gym now for 3 months, you're probably going to need a month and a half to get yourself back to where you were. While we may not have felt like we lost a lot of strength, we lost a good bit of that adaptation, and we definitely lost a little bit of our maximum recoverable volume, which is the amount of volume that your body can endure in training and still be able to recover. So remember, this brings us back to that perfect balance of stimulus and recovery. So the number one thing you got to think about is newbie gains. So obviously it's going to be easier to rebuild the tissue than it is going to be to rebuild new tissue or to build new tissue. This has definitely been proven in multiple studies across the board, and it's definitely going to be a space and time where you are going to rapidly rebuild your muscle tissue versus rapidly rebuild new tissue. So that should not be your goal in this comeback phase, to actually gain new tissue here. And this brings me back to that half rule. If you've spent 3 months outside the gym, it's going to take you 1.5 months most likely to return back to that state at which you were. And this also means the state at which you were in terms of muscle tissue. With the great concept of newbie gains here is that the amount of volume that you need to create the stimulus that you once needed is far lower. So what that means is that slow and steady, meaning lower amounts of training and lower amounts of volume, are going to produce a higher stimulus, and you are going to actually be able to recover from those far faster if executed correctly. So again, you don't have to do the same amount of volume that you did before to see the same amount of results. So the number 2 thing is you have to assume strength has been lost. 100% assume that. Be surprised if it didn't, but it is most likely going to be the case. For me personally, I've seen strength go in a couple different directions. 1, I've been in a dieting phase for most of quarantine, and going back into the gym, I'm dieting. So my numbers and my stimulation needed to create a good pump are definitely very, very different. So with my clients who are dieting, they've definitely been able to kind of carry over some of their strength training, because again, we aren't training at a maximum MRV, so maximum recoverable volume. We're just not pushing and overreaching in general. So therefore their transitions have been a little bit different. But for those of my clients who were in maintenance phases or possibly surplus phases or phases in which we were overreaching, you have to understand that there is going to be some strength lost. So forget your old numbers. Not to say you have to throw your old logs in the trash, but you definitely want to get them out of your gym bag, because guess what? You're not going to need to return to those numbers real quick, and you're not going to need to. Remember, this goes back to that volume. You don't need as much volume to get the same stimulus as you used to. So the number 3 thing is exercise selection. Exercise selection is going to really be paramount here. So you want to think of a couple of things here. Soreness is the devil. Say that again. Soreness is the devil. You do not want to create so much adaptation that you cannot recover from it. Therefore, you don't want to create this amount of soreness that you can't go back into the gym the next day, can't go back into training the next day. You don't want that debilitating soreness. A little bit of noticeability that you trained the day before is very important to feel, but again, you don't want to hammer yourself with delayed onset muscle soreness. And understand that soreness is not indicative of hypertrophy. It's most of the time indicative of tissue damage. And again, we want to find that stimulus and recovery balance, and we don't want to find ourselves in tissue damage. So when it comes to picking your exercises, you want to think of the stimulus that's going to create a high sensation versus a high fatigue. So high fatigue, again, talks about that tissue damage. High stimulation talks about actually feeling a pump. Are you actually feeling your tissue contract? Are you feeling controlled with the amount of load that you're dealing with? And are you feeling the blood flow to the tissue? That's the most important thing. Blood flow to the tissue, that change in discoloration of the tissue when you're working that muscle, is actually indicative of a really good blood flow, really good nutrients being delivered to that muscle cell. And that's the kind of movement that you want to really recruit in your training. So any specific movements that you're actually feeling really good doing, and you actually have that visible pump and visible change in the surface of your epidermis, that's most likely going to be the type of exercises you want to program in the first 1 to 2 weeks of getting back into the gym. So for example, this is oftentimes best executed with cables and machines. Cables put a great deal of tension in a really good localized spot with most of the movements that you do in an isolation setting. And machines keep you in that fixed position, so you're able to let neurological adaptations happen in those specific motor patterns because the machine fixes you in that position. So I really highly encourage the use of cables and machines when going back into the gym. And for most of us, this is what we miss the most being in quarantine. We might have had access to dumbbells and barbells and free weights or resistance bands and some sort of maybe body weight training system, but we didn't have access to actual dual cable pulleys and actual machines that we may have missed the most. Definitely capitalize on those programming in your training because those are high sensation and low fatigue. When it comes to your high fatigue movements or your compound movements, you definitely want to start to reintroduce them, but you want to reintroduce them at a low frequency and also go slower in adding your loads. For example, in my lower body training days, I'm not stacking on a barbell squat, a barbell RDL, and a barbell hip thrust all in one day as I return back into the gym. Those are 3 high fatigue movements that are going to offset that stimulus versus recovery balance. When I'm programming my training, I'm personally only going to want to put 1 to 2 of those high fatigue movements, and I'm going to want to go slower in my load progression. So if I came back to the gym and 95 pounds on my barbell squat is giving me an RPE of around 7 to 8, I'm going to definitely want to progress much slowly and go like 105, 110, and I'm not going to jump all the way to 135 within the first 1 to 2 weeks of programming my barbell squat back into my training. The number 5 thing, and probably the most complicated thing that you have to understand, is neurological adaptations. And this kind of comes back to that balance with stimulus and recovery. So understand that you are now given the opportunity to master technique and master execution, because again, your amount of motor patterns needed are far less. So the amount of time that you are going to spend in the gym will be far less at first. And that means that you can take your time, because again, you're not having to go through 6 to 7 motor patterns. You're just having to probably go through 5, maybe 4 to 5. And that's going to open up that window of time to really focus on mind-muscle connection, really focus on execution and technique of a particular lift. With neurological adaptation, you want to think of training within a specific RPE. So in your first 1 to 2 weeks, you really want to train at an RPE where you leave some reps in the tank. I would honestly recommend at least 2 to 3 reps still left in the tank. So on an RPE scale of 1 to 10, this would mean that you're training at probably a 6 to a 7 at the close of every single set. Again, training at an RPE with leaving 2 to 3 reps in the tank at every single set is going to give you the appropriate neurological adaptation without throwing off that ability for your body to recover, without throwing off that maximum recoverable volume, that MRV. And again, when you're training at a lower RPE, you have to remember that detrained lifters don't have to train at a high volume to regain tissue. It all comes back to that ability, and number one, to seek out the newbie gains that you have the opportunity to achieve right now. With neurological adaptations being considered, you also have the opportunity to think of isolation exercises being paramount. Things like bicep curls, leg extension, leg curls. These are going to be high stimulation options but low fatigue, meaning there's not any other parts of the body trying to work to stabilize or to recruit that particular muscle group from working. You are essentially trying your best to focus on that one muscle tissue and get the amount of stimulation that you need, the pump that you need. All right, so one final wrap up here. You have 5 things to think about when you return back into the gym. 1 is the ability to get newbie gains. We all love that. 2 is assume that strength has been lost. Don't assume that you will return back to your usual lifting self within 1 to 2 weeks. It's not going to happen. 3 is exercise selection. Understand the difference between high stimulation and high fatigue movement patterns for you and what you have access to in your particular gym setting. And then 4 is neurological adaptation. Understand that the neurological connection that you have to make requires you to isolate movements. And so isolation exercises, great pump-based exercises, are going to be really key here to returning back into the gym and creating a really optimal program for yourself. That wraps up this little coaching corner video. I hope you guys found some great insight into helping you build your training program, or if you're one of the Audacious Athlete custom coaching clients, this is a video to help you understand how your coach is shaping your program to the best of their ability to help you return back into the gym to get stronger, more efficiently, and more effectively return back to your normal lifting numbers. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to give me a thumbs up if you liked this quick video. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video from us, and we will see you guys in the next coaching module.